She showed up in plain clothes, no uniform, no unit, just a faded civilian badge clipped to her chest. The crew on the dock rolled their eyes. "Another bureaucrat," someone muttered. One sailor laughed when she asked about the sub-schedule. They told her to wait by the edge of the pier, alone. No one expected anything. Then, without warning, sonar pings lit up the screens. The water swelled. A nuclear submarine surfaced directly in front of her, slowly, silently, as if summoned. No one moved, because they knew what that meant. And suddenly, that badge didn't look civilian anymore. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you enjoyed this story and want to see more like it, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us create more content just like this. The gray spring morning at Naval Station Norfolk hung heavy with mist, softening the edges of America's largest naval base as it slowly stirred to life. At 5:47 a.m., a nondescript sedan pulled into a restricted parking area, and Meredith Voss emerged. A 42-year-old woman with calculating eyes and salt and pepper hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her weathered blazer and khaki pants stood in stark contrast to the crisp military uniforms around her. The only hint of officialdom was a faded civilian badge clipped to her chest. Meredith walked with quiet purpose toward Pier 12, her gaze methodically scanning the surroundings. As she approached the security checkpoint, Chief Warrant Officer Thackeray looked up from his clipboard, his 20 years of naval service evident in the lines around his eyes and his immediate assessment of Meredith as an outsider. "ID and authorization," he said flatly, not bothering with courtesies. Meredith held up her badge. Department of Energy, Special Oversight Division. Thackeray examined it with thinly veiled contempt. "Another audit? We just had Pentagon people through here last month." "Not an audit," Meredith replied evenly. "I need information regarding the scheduled movements of the USS Colorado." The chief's eyebrows rose. Around them, several sailors paused in their duties, exchanging glances. An Ohio-class nuclear submarine wasn't something civilian administrators typically inquired about. "That information is classified," Thackeray said, handing back her badge as if it were slightly distasteful. "I'd need to see specific clearance documentation." "My clearance is noted on the badge," Meredith said, her voice remaining calm despite the growing audience of smirking sailors. A younger petty officer leaned against a bollard, making no effort to hide his amusement. "Lady, those boats don't surface for pencil pushers," he said, drawing chuckles from his colleagues. Thackeray's mouth twitched in a suppressed smile. "If you're really interested in submarines, ma'am, why don't you wait by the edge of the pier? Great view of the harbor from there." The suggestion was delivered with mock helpfulness that barely disguised his intent to isolate and dismiss her. More laughter rippled through the gathered sailors as Meredith nodded once, seemingly unfazed, and walked toward the designated spot, a solitary figure against the vast gray water, apparently forgotten as the naval personnel returned to their duties with dismissive headshakes. But as the minutes passed, Meredith stood motionless, watching the water with the patience of someone who knew exactly what she was waiting for. Inside the base's operations center, Commander Afolabi was reviewing sonar data when something unusual appeared on his screen. He leaned forward in his chair, the blue glow of multiple monitors illuminating his concerned expression. "Run that trace again," he ordered the sonar technician, whose fingers were already flying across the keyboard. "Same result, sir. Unidentified submarine, approaching from the southeast. Deep channel, moving at 15 knots. "That's impossible," Afolabi muttered. "Nothing scheduled to approach from that vector." He reached for the secure communications console. "Get me SUBLANT command immediately, and check if we have any Allied vessels conducting exercises in the area." The operations center hummed with increasing tension as reports filtered in. All scheduled submarines were accounted for. No Allied nations had reported operations in the area. The approaching vessel wasn't responding to secure communications. "Sir," a young ensign called out, her voice tight with stress as she studied the tracking system. "Based on current trajectory, whatever this is, it's heading directly for Pier 12. Commander Afolabi's eyes narrowed. "Activate security protocols. I want armed response teams at that pier immediately." As personnel scrambled to respond, a senior technician looked up from his station with confusion. "Commander, the vessel is surfacing." "Where?" "Directly in front of Pier 12, sir." Afalabi's gaze snapped to the security feed showing Meredith Voss standing alone at the pier's edge, watching the water with unnatural calm. "Who the hell is that woman?" he demanded. Chief Thackeray was midway through his coffee when the alarms began to sound. His radio crackled with urgent voices calling for security teams. Confused, he looked toward the water and froze. The surface before Pier 12 had begun to swell, a massive displacement of water forming where no vessel should be. Without warning, the black hull of an Ohio-class nuclear submarine broke the surface, directly in front of Meredith Voss. Not at a designated docking area, not with tugs or support vessels, just there, as if answering a silent call. Thackeray's coffee cup slipped from his fingers, shattering unnoticed on the concrete. As the massive vessel rose from the depths, complete silence fell over the pier. Armed security personnel arrived and took defensive positions, their weapons at the ready, but their expressions betraying their uncertainty. The submarine's conning tower emerged fully, revealing markings that even Thackeray, with his decades of experience, didn't recognize. Specialized insignia indicating a classification beyond his knowledge. The vessel completed its surfacing and held position, impossibly steady in the water, directly facing Meredith. The top hatch opened with a hydraulic hiss. Captain Ryerson emerged and stood rigid on the platform, his gaze locked directly on Meredith. And without hesitation, he rendered a sharp, formal salute, a gesture of absolute respect and deference. Thackeray approached Meredith slowly, bewilderment replacing his earlier contempt. "Ma'am, I don't understand. That's the Phantom Fleet. They don't report to." His voice trailed off as Meredith reached inside her jacket and revealed what was hidden beneath her civilian badge. A small obsidian card with embedded platinum circuitry and a single red star. "I know what they don't report to, Chief," Meredith said quietly. "They report to me." Commander Afolabi arrived with more security personnel, who immediately lowered their weapons upon seeing the card. The commander's face went ashen. "Authorization Omega. You're deep well." Meredith nodded once, then turned toward the submarine. "Captain Ryerson, secure your vessel and prepare for inspection. The situation is more complex than we initially assessed." "Yes, ma'am," the captain replied, his voice carrying absolute certainty. Thackeray stood rooted in place, his worldview crumbling as the realization settled in. This woman wasn't a bureaucrat. She was something far more significant. She wielded authority over America's most lethal assets through a system he'd never known existed. "Chief," Meredith said, turning to him with eyes that now seemed to carry the weight of impossible decisions. "I'll need access to your secure communications center immediately." 30 minutes later, in a hastily assembled briefing room with senior officers, Meredith laid out the situation with clinical precision. 3 weeks ago, our monitoring systems detected anomalies in the nuclear fleet's communication protocols. Someone has been attempting to insert unauthorized command pathways. The briefing room was silent as satellite imagery appeared on the main screen, showing Russian naval movements near Alaska. "This wasn't just an inspection," Meredith continued. "It was a verification that the Colorado would respond to legitimate civilian oversight rather than potentially compromised military channels." "Are you suggesting the chain of command has been infiltrated?" Commander Afolabi asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm confirming it," Meredith replied, sliding a data drive across the table. "This contains the evidence, including the names of 3 admirals currently under surveillance." Captain Ryerson leaned forward. "The surfacing maneuver today was a test," Meredith finished. "One that you passed, Captain. Your submarine responded to Omega protocols rather than the countermanding orders I know you received 17 minutes before surfacing." The implications hung in the air. Someone had tried to prevent the submarine's response to Meredith's authority. The civilian oversight program, Deep Well, exists precisely because there might come a time when the military chain of command is compromised, Meredith explained, her gaze sweeping the stunned faces around her. "Today proved why we need it." Commander Afolabi asked quietly, "How many of you are there?" Meredith simply responded, "Enough." 4 hours later, the base had been locked down. Communications were restricted to secure channels only. In the command center, Meredith stood watching as military intelligence officers led away a pale-faced lieutenant commander in handcuffs. He was the local connection, Captain Ryerson confirmed, stepping beside her. Planted the modified communications protocols on 3 vessels. Says he was recruited through a series of encrypted messages. Claimed he thought it was a classified NATO initiative. Meredith nodded, unsurprised. And the admirals? 2 have been detained for questioning. Admiral Schaefer has disappeared, last seen boarding a private jet to Helsinki 3 hours ago. He won't get far, Meredith said with quiet certainty. We have resources outside conventional channels. Commander Afolabi approached, his earlier shock now replaced with professional respect. The Joint Chiefs are requesting a full briefing. How much are you authorized to disclose about Deepwell? Only what's necessary, Meredith replied. The program functions best when it remains largely unknown. Even to people like me? Afolabi asked. Meredith's expression softened slightly. Especially to people like you, Commander. You believe in the chain of command, as you should. But history has taught us that sometimes chains can be broken or subverted. We're the failsafe that never appears in any official document. A shadow government, Thackeray said from behind them. Meredith turned to the chief, who had been uncharacteristically silent since the revelation. Not governance, Chief. Oversight. There's a difference. We don't command day-to-day operations. We intervene only when necessary, when the system itself is at risk. As day turned to evening, Meredith stood again at the pier's edge. The submarine had docked properly, and a semblance of normal operations had resumed despite the ongoing investigation. Chief Thackeray approached her, his demeanor completely transformed from their first encounter. I've been in the Navy 20 years, he said quietly. Thought I understood how things worked. He paused, watching the last light glint off the water. I was wrong about you, about what that badge meant. Meredith nodded, accepting his unspoken apology. Most people go their whole careers never knowing we exist. That's by design. How do you do it? Thackeray asked. Carry that kind of responsibility without anyone knowing? Meredith looked out over the water, her face momentarily revealing the weight she carried. Some burdens are meant to be carried silently, she answered. The heaviest responsibilities rarely come with recognition. In the distance, the USS Colorado sat quietly at its mooring, its lethal capacity hidden beneath its dark hull, much like Meredith's authority, invisible until needed. Will we see you again? Thackeray asked. Only if something goes wrong, Meredith replied, a faint smile touching her lips. Let's hope we don't meet again, Chief. As she walked back toward her nondescript sedan, the base sprawled around her. Thousands of personnel, massive ships, and in the midst of it all, one solitary figure with more authority than anyone had realized. The sun set over Norfolk as Meredith removed her civilian badge, revealing the obsidian card beneath, a symbol of power hidden in plain sight, ready to emerge when the nation needed it most. Meredith Voss sat across from Captain Ryerson in the secure briefing room deep within Naval Station Norfolk. The sterile space, with its reinforced walls and signal jammers, felt appropriately tomb-like for the gravity of their discussion. Outside, the base had transformed into a hive of controlled chaos, as intelligence officers and NCIS agents worked to contain what was quickly becoming the most significant counterintelligence operation in decades. Walk me through exactly what happened when you received the countermanding orders, Meredith said, her fingers steepled beneath her chin. Ryerson, a decorated submarine commander with 18 years of service, still carried himself with military precision despite having been awake for 36 hours. It came through the secondary quantum encrypted channel, the one supposedly accessible only to STRATCOM and the National Command Authority. Standard formatting, proper authentication codes, everything by the book. But you ignored it, Meredith observed. Ryerson's expression remained neutral, but his eyes revealed his inner conflict. I recognize the Omega Protocol signature in your summons. It supersedes even presidential orders, though most officers believe it's merely theoretical. Something taught at the academy, but never actually implemented. Most officers would be correct, Meredith replied. Deepwell has only activated Omega Protocol 3 times since its creation in 1983. Today makes 4. The captain nodded slowly. May I ask a question, ma'am? Meredith's lips curved in the ghost of a smile. You may not receive an answer, but yes. What happens now? To the Navy? To the chain of command? Meredith considered this, choosing her words with care. That depends on how far the compromise extends. Our initial assessment suggests this operation was designed to create a shadow control mechanism for specific nuclear assets. 3 Ohio-class submarines, 2 aircraft carriers, and potentially elements of the ground-based nuclear deterrent. A splinter force, Ryerson whispered. My God. Precisely. Which is why Deepwell exists, to ensure no single entity, not even those within our own government, can subvert nuclear command and control without detection. Meredith slid a tablet across the table. This operation has been in development for at least 18 months. We've identified financial transactions through shell companies in Singapore, encrypted communications routed through diplomatic channels, and several key military personnel who have been compromised. Ryerson studied the data, his face paling. Admiral Schaefer was my mentor at Annapolis. I know, Meredith said, her voice softening for the first time. His involvement is still being assessed. It's possible he was being manipulated rather than actively participating. The captain looked up sharply. You don't believe that? No, I don't, she admitted. But I've learned to separate evidence from intuition. Their conversation was interrupted by a soft knock. Commander Afolabi entered, followed by a stern-looking woman in civilian clothes similar to Meredith's. Ms. Voss, this is Director Harlow from Naval Intelligence, Afolabi said, his formal tone indicating the sensitivity of the meeting. Meredith stood. Eleanor, I didn't expect you until tomorrow. Things escalated, Director Harlow replied. The Secretary of Defense has been briefed. He's requesting Deepwell's operational parameters and reporting structure. Meredith's expression hardened. The Secretary knows our parameters. They haven't changed since the program's inception. He's insisting, Harlow pressed. Given the circumstances? The circumstances are precisely why our independence is non-negotiable, Meredith replied. If we've identified 3 compromised admirals, we can't dismiss the possibility that the compromise extends higher. The tension in the room thickened as the implications of her statement settled over them. Captain Ryerson and Commander Afolabi exchanged glances, suddenly uncertain about where they stood in a world where even the Secretary of Defense could be viewed with suspicion. I need to speak with Ms. Voss alone, Director Harlow said, her tone making it clear this wasn't a request. After the naval officers departed, Harlow's professional demeanor shifted. You caused quite a spectacle today, Mary. A nuclear submarine surfacing directly in front of you. The whole point of Deepwell is discretion. The whole point of Deepwell is effectiveness, Meredith countered. I needed to confirm that Captain Ryerson would respond to Omega Protocol despite contrary orders. The spectacle was regrettable but necessary. Harlow sighed, sinking into a chair. 4 other Deepwell operators have been activated in the last 12 hours. Alvarez is at Kings Bay with the Atlantic Fleet. Nguyen is at Strategic Command. Chen is shadowing the Joint Chiefs. And Thorne? Deep cover with Admiral Schaefer's staff. He's the one who first flagged the anomalies in the communication protocols. Meredith nodded, piecing together the larger picture. This isn't just about controlling submarines. It's about fracturing NATO response capabilities. The Russian naval movements near Alaska, Chinese exercises in the South China Sea. They're creating pressure points to test the compromised command structure. That's our assessment, Harlow confirmed. Which brings me to why I'm really here. The President wants to meet with you. Meredith went still. That's not protocol. Neither is 3 admirals attempting to establish a shadow command over nuclear assets, Harlow countered. We're in uncharted waters, Mary. The President needs to understand what we're dealing with, directly from you. Meredith turned to look out the small, reinforced window at the naval base beyond. Deepwell operators rarely interacted with elected officials. Their authority existed in a carefully designed gray area, answerable only to a classified oversight committee with members from all 3 branches of government. Direct presidential involvement risked politicizing a system designed specifically to transcend politics. When? She finally asked. Tonight. Andrews Air Force Base, then straight to the Situation Room. Meredith nodded once. I'll need all the intelligence we've gathered so far. And Harlow. Make sure the President understands that I'm not there to be questioned about Deepwell's authority. I'm there to brief him on a critical national security threat. He's the Commander-in-Chief, Harlow reminded her gently. And I'm the failsafe when that chain of command is compromised, Meredith replied evenly. We both have our roles to play. 3 hours later, Meredith stood on the tarmac at Naval Station Norfolk's airfield as a sleek executive jet with minimal markings taxied toward her. The wind whipped her hair as she watched Chief Thackeray's vehicle approach. He parked and walked over, carrying a secure briefcase. "The data you requested, ma'am," he said, handing it over. His demeanor had transformed completely from their first meeting, the contempt replaced by a complex mixture of respect and unease. "Thank you, Chief." She accepted the case, then studied him for a moment. "Something on your mind?" Thackeray hesitated, then squared his shoulders. "Permission to speak freely?" "Always. I've served my country for 20 years, believing I understood the system I was part of. Finding out about Deepwell, about you, it's like learning there's been a ghost in the machine all along. It makes me wonder what else I don't know." Meredith nodded slowly. "That's a natural reaction. But consider this. The Constitution created a system of checks and balances. Deepwell is simply another check, created after we recognized that nuclear weapons exist outside the framers' imagination. The power they represent required additional safeguards. Safeguards that operate in secret, Thackeray observed. Some protections must remain invisible until needed, Meredith replied, like antibodies in your bloodstream. You don't see them, but they're there, waiting to respond to infection. Their conversation was interrupted as the jet's stairs deployed. Captain Ryerson approached, also carrying secure materials. "You're coming?" Meredith asked, surprised. "Director Harlow's orders. The president wants to hear directly from the Colorado's commander." Meredith accepted this with a nod, then turned back to Thackeray. "When this is resolved, most people will never know how close we came to catastrophe. That's as it should be. The public sleeps soundly because people like you stand watch, Chief." "And people like you watch the watchers," he replied. "Someone has to," she said simply, then turned and boarded the waiting aircraft. The flight to Andrews Air Force Base passed intense preparation. Meredith and Captain Ryerson reviewed the intelligence, identifying patterns in what initially appeared to be isolated incidents. The picture that emerged was disturbing, a carefully orchestrated attempt to create a parallel command structure within America's nuclear forces, potentially allowing for unauthorized deployment or, more likely, strategic paralysis during a critical moment. "The question remains," Ryerson said as they began their descent. "Who's behind it? Russian intelligence, Chinese military, internal actors?" "All evidence points to a collaborative effort," Meredith replied. "Financial trails lead to Moscow, technical signatures match known Chinese methodologies, but the operational knowledge, that's purely internal. Someone with intimate understanding of our nuclear command and control provided the blueprint." Their conversation halted as the aircraft touched down. Through the window, Meredith could see the distinctive Marine One helicopter waiting on the tarmac, its rotors already spinning. Waiting beside it was a figure she recognized immediately, the President of the United States. As she descended the aircraft stairs, Meredith felt the weight of the moment. This meeting represented the collision of two systems, the public face of American power meeting its shadow guardian. The President stepped forward, extending his hand. "Ms. Voss, I've read your file, or rather, the portions I'm cleared to see." "Mr. President," she acknowledged, shaking his hand firmly, "I wish we were meeting under different circumstances." "As do I." He gestured toward Marine One. "We have much to discuss, and not much time. Admiral Schaefer has been located in Helsinki. Russian intelligence is moving him to an unknown location as we speak." As they boarded the helicopter, Meredith felt a shift in her role. For decades, Deepwell had operated in the shadows, its authority clear but rarely exercised. Now, as she took a seat across from the commander-in-chief, those shadows were receding. The question remaining was whether the system she had sworn to protect could withstand the light. Marine One thundered across the Capitol, its blades slicing through the evening air as it approached the White House. Inside, Meredith Voss sat facing the president, surrounded by a small team of national security advisors and intelligence officials. Through the window, the Washington Monument stood illuminated against the darkening sky, a reminder of the enduring institutions they were fighting to protect. "Walk me through the structure of Deepwell," the president said, his voice calm despite the crisis unfolding. "I understand the concept, civilian oversight of nuclear assets, but the operational mechanics have deliberately been kept vague, even to me." Meredith nodded. Deepwell was established in 1983 under President Reagan after a series of near misses during the Cold War. A NATO exercise called Able Archer nearly triggered a Soviet first strike because Moscow misinterpreted our movements. Separately, there were incidents where equipment malfunctions almost launched missiles automatically. The administration recognized that the traditional chain of command might be insufficient during nuclear crises. So Reagan created a shadow authority, the National Security Advisor interjected. "Not shadow, supplementary," Meredith corrected. "Deepwell operators are civilians with specialized training. We have direct command authority over nuclear assets in very specific circumstances. When there's evidence the chain of command has been compromised, when false launch orders are detected, or when fail-safe systems themselves fail." The president leaned forward. "And who selects these operators? Who oversees them?" "A classified committee with representatives from all three branches of government. 2 Supreme Court justices, 3 senior members of Congress from both parties, and 2 executive branch officials not directly in the nuclear chain of command. The committee selects operators based on psychological profiles, ethical evaluations, and complete political neutrality." Captain Ryerson, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "Sir, if I may, Deepwell's existence explains something that's always bothered submariners. Our launch protocols include verification steps that seem redundant, even contradictory. Now, I understand why. They're designed to be recognized by operators like Ms. Voss." The president nodded slowly, processing this information. "And today's demonstration at Norfolk? A confirmation that the Colorado would respond to legitimate civilian oversight rather than the compromised military channels," Meredith explained. "Captain Ryerson received countermanding orders through official channels, but recognized the Omega Protocol in my request. That tells us the hardware systems remain secure, even if elements of the command structure are compromised." The helicopter touched down on the White House lawn. Within minutes, the group had moved to the Situation Room, where additional intelligence officers waited with updates. Director Harlow was already there, coordinating with other Deepwell operators across the country. "Admiral Schaefer has been moved to a Russian intelligence safe house near Helsinki," she reported as they entered. "Finnish authorities are cooperating with our extraction team. More concerning is what we've discovered about the scope of the operation." A junior analyst stepped forward, activating a secured display. "We've identified 17 compromised officers across the nuclear command structure, 3 admirals, 4 generals, and 10 officers with direct launch authority. But the real threat appears to be technological." Satellite imagery appeared on the main screen, showing a facility in the mountains of North Korea. This installation has been developing specialized quantum interference systems designed to mimic our nuclear command protocols. When integrated with the modified communication systems planted by Admiral Schaefer's network, they could potentially issue false launch orders, or, more likely, prevent legitimate orders from being recognized during a crisis. "Creating strategic paralysis," the president concluded. "If our nuclear forces can't respond to legitimate commands during a first strike scenario." "Precisely," Meredith confirmed. "It's not about launching our weapons. It's about ensuring they can't be launched when needed, the ultimate compromise of deterrence." The president turned to her. "What's your recommendation?" "We need to activate all Deepwell operators simultaneously. Conduct a system-wide verification of command protocols across the nuclear triad. Any vessel, aircraft, or silo that fails authentication gets immediately isolated from the network until it can be physically secured and its systems verified." "That's never been done," the defense secretary protested. "The coordination alone would require—" "We've been preparing for this scenario since Deepwell's inception," Meredith interrupted. "The protocols exist. What we need is your authorization to implement them." The president studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Do it." The next 12 hours unfolded with the precision of a military operation. Across the country and around the world, Deepwell operators emerged from their cover identities, professors, bureaucrats, researchers, consultants, and presented their credentials to stunned military commanders. On aircraft carriers in the Pacific, at missile silos in the Midwest, at bomber bases and submarine pens, the invisible system designed to safeguard America's most lethal weapons revealed itself. At Strategic Command headquarters, screens displayed the status of each verification. Green indicators multiplied as nuclear assets confirmed their secure status. Yellow warnings appeared where authentication was delayed. And in 7 critical locations, red alerts signaled compromised systems or resistant commanders. Meredith, now operating from a secure command post within the Pentagon, coordinated the deep well response. Delta Team has secured the USS Kentucky, she reported to the assembled officials. Compromised communications module identified and isolated, captain cooperating fully. Mine at Air Force Base still showing resistance, Director Harlow added. Colonel Westfield has barricaded himself in the command center and is refusing to acknowledge deep well authority. The president's face was grim. Options? We have a secondary deep well operator on base, Dr. Elaine Thorne, civilian contractor in their engineering division, Meredith explained. She's activated a security override that's locked down all launch capabilities until Colonel Westfield can be removed. As they spoke, updates continued to flow in from across the global command structure. The Russian government issued a formal denial of involvement, even as Finnish special forces surrounded the safe house containing Admiral Schaefer. Chinese naval vessels increased patrols in the South China Sea, but maintained standard distances from American assets. They're watching to see if our command structure fractures, the National Security Advisor observed. Then let's show them it won't, the president replied. Ms. Voss, I want a coordinated demonstration of command integrity, something visible that shows our nuclear forces remain under absolute civilian control. Meredith considered this request, then nodded. We can implement Broken Arrow Protocol, a synchronized surface maneuver by all deployed ballistic missile submarines, followed by immediate resubmergence. It would demonstrate command authority without revealing positions or capabilities. Make it happen. 4 hours later, in oceans around the world, the surface of the water began to swell. Ohio-class submarines, the most invisible and lethal components of America's nuclear triad, rose simultaneously to just below the surface, visible to surveillance satellites but maintaining their tactical security. They held position for exactly 90 seconds, then disappeared back into the depths, a coordinated demonstration of unified command that sent an unmistakable message to watching adversaries. In the White House Situation Room, the president watched the satellite feeds with a mixture of awe and sobriety. Have we secured all compromised locations? All but one, Meredith reported. Kitsap Naval Base in Washington State. The USS Maine's executive officer has taken control of the vessel and is threatening to expose Deepwell's existence publicly unless granted immunity. For what? He claims the entire compromise was orchestrated by elements within our own government, specifically naming 3 senators on the Intelligence Committee. He says he has documentation. The room fell silent as the implications settled over them. The possibility that the conspiracy extended beyond military officers into the legislative branch represented an even greater threat to constitutional order. I need to speak with him directly, Meredith said firmly. Out of the question, the defense secretary objected. We have SEAL teams standing by. We can resolve this with force if necessary. Force against our own submarine crew, Meredith countered. That's exactly the scenario Deepwell was created to prevent. Let me talk to him. If he's telling the truth, we need to know. If he's lying, I can assess that better than anyone. The president studied her, then nodded. Go. Take whatever resources you need. 24 hours later, Meredith stood on another pier, this time at Naval Base Kitsap. Before her, the massive USS Maine had surfaced and was being held in a security cordon by Coast Guard vessels and Marine units. A small boat approached from the submarine, carrying Executive Officer Lawrence. When he stepped onto the pier, Meredith was struck by how young he appeared, no more than 35, with the intense focus of someone who had dedicated his life to duty. Commander Lawrence, she greeted him. I'm Meredith Voss, Deepwell Primary. I know who you are, he replied tightly. That's why I asked for you specifically. Before I surrender the Maine or hand over my evidence, I need your personal guarantee that this goes all the way to the truth, no matter who it implicates. Meredith studied him carefully. You have it. Deepwell exists outside the chain of command precisely to ensure accountability applies to everyone. Lawrence seemed to measure her sincerity, then handed over a secure drive. 3 senators on the Intelligence Committee have been working with Admiral Schaefer for years, not to help foreign powers, to consolidate domestic control over nuclear assets. They believe civilian oversight has become too diffuse, too bureaucratic. They wanted to create a streamlined command structure outside of normal channels. A coup, Meredith said flatly. They called it a contingency plan for when traditional authorities might hesitate to act. Meredith took the drive, understanding the magnitude of what she held. "You did the right thing, Commander." "Did I?" he asked quietly. "I've spent my career believing in the chain of command. Now, I've broken it." "Sometimes protecting the system means recognizing when it's been compromised," she replied. "That's what Deepwell has always understood." 2 days later, as the crisis subsided, Meredith found herself back at Norfolk, where it had all begun. The investigation was continuing. 3 senators had been quietly removed from the Intelligence Committee pending a classified inquiry. Admiral Schaefer was in custody, cooperating with authorities. The compromised communication systems had been identified and removed. Chief Thackeray approached as she stood watching the USS Colorado, now properly docked and undergoing security protocols. "I heard you're leaving," he said. Meredith nodded. "Deepwell operators return to the shadows once the crisis is resolved. It's how the system works. After everything that happened, everything you revealed, you just go back to being invisible?" "That's the job," she said simply. "We're not meant to be seen unless absolutely necessary." Thackeray shook his head in wonder. "How many others like you are out there?" Meredith smiled faintly. "That's the question that keeps potential adversaries awake at night. And it's the reason the system works." As she walked toward her waiting car, Meredith removed her now famous civilian badge. Beneath it, the obsidian card with its red star caught the morning light for a moment before she tucked it away inside her jacket, a symbol of authority returning to the shadows, invisible until needed again.